This is how I would create a winning beauty product today. I'm Akash Mehta, CEO and co-founder of Fable Mane, a hair wellness brand sold at retailers like Sephora. And fun fact, we sold a hair oil every 2 minutes last year, which is pretty crazy. So first up, you want to figure out your why and create the brief of your product. Hopefully, many of you already got to this point right now, but in case you haven't, don't rush this step. For me, with my sister, we had to really go deep into our why, and it took a bit longer than we expected, and that was okay. So you might already have figured out a gap in the market or have gone back into your memory lane and kind of thought about a product from your childhood that you want to bring into the market today. Whatever your story is, make sure you do your homework. So what I mean by this is you might want to look at what already exists in the market. What would the price then be of your similar benchmarks? What would the sizing be? What would the brand look and feel be? So this can be a little bit tedious, but do not get tempted to rush this step. Once you've created your brief and you're really sure of it, and try not to show too many people because too many opinions early on can be very, very distracting. Just kind of keep it to yourself and go with your gut at every point of this journey. You then want to go to the second step, which is finding who to help create your beauty product. Now, there are many different ways you can do this. First up, you want to figure out what kind of product you want to create. Do you want to create something that already exists that you just kind of stick your label on and build some marketing story around, so you're more focusing on the brand and not necessarily the products, which is not the way I would do it, but it's perfectly okay. That's called white labeling a product. That is something that you have to consider then a different route. But if you want to perhaps create your own product that's proprietary, unique, you own the formula, you've got the trademark, maybe patents, that can be very helpful for creating a legacy product or having a much greater valuation of the brand that you're building. Either way, you have 3 different routes to go through. One is do it yourself, which is pretty much the way we did it at Fable Mane, which is handle every step of the journey, which ends up being a lot more work than I imagined, but trust me, so much more rewarding later down the line. Or you can do it with someone. That means you kind of share kind of certain services where you might take over some, but you have a partner that takes over others. Obviously, you have to consider then giving a chunk of potentially royalties or some money or some percentages away to that third party or that kind of partner you have. And the third option is do it completely with someone else. So that means kind of full turnkey. So someone that kind of takes your whole idea, builds it, and you can kind of just wait for the final product to reach into your hands. Either way, decide what's best for you, but I'll give you the story of how to do it yourself, and this is the journey also how I created Fable Mane. So now you want to find the right partner. So finding a lab today is actually pretty easy, but it seems hard at first because labs are notoriously known for not being very good at marketing themselves or having good SEO. So if you Google today, good labs near my area, like you're not going to find much. So you have to figure out where to meet these labs, and they do go to places, and these are often called trade shows. These trade shows, there exist many around the world. Cosmoprof is one of the biggest, and these are probably the most important way to meet the retailer, build that relationship, and start figuring out who you want to choose. Now, what I mean by this is you go to these kind of expos and these kind of big convention centers, and in them you'll have a bunch of stands by different labs. They'll actually put on the front of their kind of display the products that they've developed. Sometimes you'll actually see that some different stands have the same product. It's because not one lab always creates one product. Sometimes they share. Someone does, for example, the scent, someone does the juice. So they kind of both put the products on display. But it's really important to also have a look at those products because they might be from your homework who you're benchmarking against, and therefore who you might want to choose and work with, right? Because they get exactly the type of product you're creating. For example, if you're a hair care brand, you might want to specifically look for the areas that have the hair labs. So those are things to consider. Make sure you go fully prepared. Something I didn't do at the beginning, which I regret, but like I didn't bring business cards. Like bring business cards, also bring a bag to get business cards. And ask really a lot of questions. This is the time where you have them fully concentrated to kind of sell and get, you guys potentially as a partner. So you want to make sure you ask all the questions there and there where you can to help avoid wasting your time later with Zooms that don't go anywhere. One thing I will say as well is if you're not comfortable, for example, at the beginning, I wasn't so comfortable going to these conventions, you can also hire a consultant to help you at the beginning, to be with you, to help on that journey. So just think about it. It's not all on you to do this because it does need someone that's got an eye for product, know how to look for the right things and ask the right questions. I would say every upcoming founder or entrepreneur should at least go to one trade show in their time. So now you've got your list of your vetted labs, and then it's going to start to the main thing, which is how to negotiate with them, work with them, and eventually sign with them. So this takes a bit of time. There's no secret sauce or formula. You can be really lucky and find your dream lab straight away, or you can take time and you can go through a bunch before you find your dream one. For us, it did take a bit longer than we thought, but that's because we were very strict and had such high standards of what kind of product we wanted to create. Now the phase 1 and phase 2 merge together because this is all about creating a brief, right? And usually the labs would either have their own system, so they'll contact you, you contact them, they would say, let us know what you're thinking, fill out our form, and then we'll see if it's of an interest for us. Because they're also choosing you, you're not just choosing them, right? And usually you have to consider a couple of things when you go to a lab. Do you have potential business for them long term? Like for them to spend time focusing on you, nourishing you, and even giving you great innovation with their chemists that are on hand. 2, do you have something that makes them excited, makes them potentially build their lab or win awards or kind of get themselves more known at? Because that's going to really help them. So kind of think about them as business too, right? And then 3, do you have a good relationship with them? Do they enjoy working with you? And that's really important to consider too. I think it's a very kind of said thing, but like, for example, we have a lab that are owned by South Asians and we're a South Asian brand, and just is a really important factor of our relationship because we're both building our own legacies in a way based on our rooted, deep-rooted culture. So I think it's very important to think about all these elements before you go into choosing your lab. But then once you've done the process form, you filled out the brief, they will then ask some very hard questions, right? Like, what is the potential first order that you're willing to do? And they might have a minimum order quantity, an MOQ, that might already decide that they're not for you. But usually don't focus too much on that because some labs can surprise you. We went to some of the biggest labs as a new startup brand, and we knew their MOQs, the minimum orders, were way above that we could do. But we told them we had the interest from Sephora. We led with that, and they were willing to scrap everything they usually do and go and take a bit of a hit, not charge us a lot at the beginning, and take a minimum order that was much lower than their usual because they saw the potential. So don't go in too much with your kind of fences that you think that the industry has. People will, and labs can surprise you. But more or less, think about your minimum order quantity, your cost of good that you're hoping to get based on your retail price that you're hoping to achieve because you've done your benchmarks. Also, you might need to send them the benchmarks that you're hoping to make similar products with. And then also some fragrances that you want to have. You have to think about bringing it like as if it's a kitchen, and you are helping them with some of the ingredients to really help make that dream dish you want. Don't just tell them and then hope it lands. Speed up the process a bit and make it much more effective by being as useful in your information sharing as possible. So then imagine you've done all this and they're very interested to work with you. You get assigned an account manager or CM, and they will start the process of working with the development of the first sample. And this is really important to understand. There's many, many routes. It's not one size fits all. For example, there are some labs that have their own chemists and they will choose their own chemists, and you've got to just work with whatever you've got. There are some labs that will also accept you to bring your own chemist. So you can hire a chemist on the side. They develop the products and then they'll do a tech transfer of the formula and try to match it as much as possible. Again, I always liken everything to a kitchen. It's like your grandma's recipe that's already created, and then you send them the recipe with the clear instructions, right? That also works. Sometimes it's important because you might, for us, we had an Ayurvedic hair brand that some of the labs never even knew some of these ingredients. I didn't want to just trust that they would get it. I had to bring an Ayurvedic consultant chemist that could develop it and then help work with them. You also have to consider that some don't even have the manufacturing capacity. Some are just labs and just chemists that will develop it, and then they need you to go to somewhere else to create the formula, right? So there are so many different routes and companies, and that will be clearer as you go to your trade shows and you understand what these companies are all and how they're all structured. But more or less, once you've found the right approach that you want to take, you then have to consider the costings, right? So some labs, again, if they really believe in you, they'll absorb all the costs, just develop samples and be like, look, we want to win your account. Because they might also understand that you're going to other labs and testing, right? You got to also think about I've got this dream product I want to create. I want to go to 3-4 labs, sign NDAs and get them all to develop this product, and the best one I'll choose, which is fair enough. So they want to land you like an agency pitching for a client. They're going to do a lot of work beforehand and know if they don't get the client, it's okay. They had to do the work to understand if they could. But there are some labs that are a bit more stringent with the protocols and they would actually charge you a rate, like a retainer fee. There are some that would even want a percentage, like the turnkey companies, of your production run or of your production value of retail sales. But more or less, usually what I've seen is try to ensure that if you are paying something up cost, it gets taken up from your full production line. I tend to think that you shouldn't need to pay a bunch at the beginning. You're giving them a lot of business later, so that should be taken from that, not from an upfront cost. So try to be careful you don't spot that, because sometimes labs can take advantage of smaller brands. And so we obviously, with that route, we didn't end up paying a lot at the beginning. We ended up taking it out of our production run, but it was important to have some budget aside for some development costs, like shipping the samples and maybe putting the deposits down. So it varies, but I had about 10 to 20K for that just set aside. And that's what, for 4 to 5 product launches at launch. So then once you have kind of worked with the labs, you have a couple of revisions. Some labs are quite strict. They might only give you 1 or 2 revisions, but usually after 2 or 3 revisions, you'll hopefully have a good dream sample that you really like. Bearing in mind, again, on the fragrance side, you can either go for unscented, but usually most labs don't have the fragrance capacities inside. So then you might need to go to a fragrance house. There are so many, from Firmenich, IFF, Robotek, that can be really helpful for you to develop a fragrance. And then they'll send the juice to the lab to also develop with the samples. And you want to do that at the beginning when you create your samples, because it's important to understand the experience in its whole entirety when you develop and test a sample, because scent is such a big part, but also the compatibility, how it's mixing with the formula, how it's feeling with the formula. It's very, very important. So once you've, let's say, developed the formula, you're in love with it, you think you found the one, and bearing in mind, you might have a few different labs working on different products, and then you end up having a situation like Fable Mane where we have multiple labs, which also is not a bad thing, because you're spreading your bets, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You then want to decide how to launch the product. And that is really all about financing and timelines, because shelf life is a big thing when it comes to this. Retailers often have shelf life requirements, sometimes 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years. So you don't want to create a lot of them, make them sit in your warehouse and then think, oh, I have so much stock, great, I don't have to worry about production for a while, let me now sell. Because ultimately, if you don't sell quick enough, you're going to have dead stock that you have to get rid of or expose or discount, and that's not ideal. Plus, it's not good for your cash flow where you're paying a lot up front. So you want to make sure you have short lead times when you create the products that ensures you to make multiple production runs as you see needed. So sometimes we have 2 or 3 production runs of the same product a year. And it's not because we're not planning correctly or we're not forecasting correctly. It's we're being mindful of our cash flow, but we're also being mindful of the shelf life requirement. So that's something to consider. So at the beginning, while the MOQs might be high, it's also important to be clear to yourself, it's good that you fight for a low MOQ, a low minimum order, because of all those things I just mentioned. So once you've signed off the formula, you'll be working very closely with your lab on a process or like a project management timeline, which is up to your finished good in your hands, right? And that's going to be based on them buying raw materials, them then also fitting in a right production time, an assembly line date for you. These labs have multiple brands they're working on that also have dates. So they might not be able to slot you in when you want. So you have to work way in advance to make sure that you've told them what your launch date is. Sometimes 6 months to a year in advance, so they can lock you in on a date. And be careful, if you miss something, let's say you don't deliver packaging on time, or you don't deliver a component on time, one wrong day can push the timeline, but your next available date to produce might be in a month's time, which can completely stop your production and your launch, right? So therefore, you have to be very, very stringent on making all these timelines and have a lot of buffers when it comes to it. So the one thing I say about this is if you're doing an approach of, for example, the lab is doing the juice, you need to send them the outer carton, you got to send them the packaging, you got to make sure you're ordering all in time. Sometimes it's better than, that's the benefit when a lab really handles all of it, because they are a bit more on top of it all. But then again, they also make mistakes, and I've seen that. So no matter what, process mapping is very important when it comes to developing and launching your product. And the one thing I want to also mention before I forget is packaging, because all of this is all about the juice. The lab is really in charge of the juice, which is the most important, let's be honest, right? But also you have to consider the vessel for that juice, and that is the packaging. So at the same time, those trade shows you're going to also have packaging vendors, but there are also some specific packaging vendors or outer carton vendors that are like LuxPack that are very important to also go to at the same time and work on the same timelines, like, months in advance as well. Because if you're doing the kind of partial turnkey or like do it yourself, where you are working with the lab, providing them these goods, you got to make sure you're developing that way in advance to make sure that it doesn't delay the timelines. So we, for example, order all our outer cartons, all our secondary packaging, and send it to the lab way in advance so they have it on file, just in case it gets late, I miss my whole timeline of production. And one thing I would say with this is you have to consider a couple of things. For example, do you want to go to stock packaging? So these are packaging that already exists in the industry, that's readily available, that usually is a lot lower in cost. Do you want to create a custom mold? This is something that you might have to pay a deposit to create the mold, like a couple of $1,000s, but then you also are creating something that's potentially trademarkable or your own design that no one else can use. a lot more timeline needed, but a lot more value long-term. All of this is very important to consider when developing your packaging. Also, do you go through secondary packaging, which is outer cartons? Do you also think about your sustainability agendas and things like type of packaging, PCR, post-consumer recyclable plastic, new material like sugarcane or like mushroom leather? All of this stuff is very important. And this will go again back to your beginning on your brand pillars and your why and your brief to help you understand what route you're going for. But you must consider timelines, cost, and feasibility. Feasibility is really important because that is how developed is your partner to be trustworthy, to develop it on time, and to not let you down. Sadly, a lot of the really innovative, new, sustainable options are usually from small startup companies that sometimes don't have the scale to develop products for you, but also the trust because they're starting. So you have to sometimes start not 100% to where you want to be, but it's a journey. And that's why my final point is how to win with your lab or, with your product is you have to always keep your lab or your stakeholders, your packaging suppliers on their toes. They can drop the ball, they can change the team, they can make mistakes, they can deprioritize you, and you have to regularly visit them. You gotta always ask them the questions, always ask them for the information that they could be hiding because they can't always trust the lab sometimes. But also you gotta make sure that you are looking at the industry and seeing what's best for your brand at that current time. There might be new suppliers that are cheaper, new innovation that's gonna make your product stand out more. All of these things is really important to drive your company to success. So don't feel comfortable. Don't be too safe. Keep it pulsing, keep on going. And everything I'm saying now is what I still do today because it's a cycle. And I still always push the boundaries when it comes to creating a winning product because to stay on top, you got to keep on driving and keep on staying in the front. So that's my little tips on how to build a winning beauty product. Also, I'm going to be creating a lot more content like this. So be sure to subscribe and let me know what kind of other videos you're interested in me creating. And also, if you're a founder or upcoming entrepreneur, let me know in the comments because I want to make this a community where we are building the brands together.